how do you stay a contender? You're a contender right now, but how do you do that balancing act between being a contender long term and being a contender now? Because my answer, and it's cheating, is, well, if you did your dynasty startup the right way, you shouldn't have a problem really. Which is like that's not a fair answer really, because we're here
That
right
is a
now.
no. It's a cop out answer because
It's a cop out
you're
answer.
acting like in
Yeah,
that little world you're building that it's impossible to have a really good draft and still have variance kick you in the nuts.
you're right. You're right. But hopefully you build a valuable roster to start out in the dynasty startup, so that mitigates the risk of ever having to dive into the rebuilding pool, which is a pool we never want to dive into. I'm not sure why we're diving into pools in this analogy, but hey, that's what we're doing, I guess. You never want to dive into the rebuilding pool if you don't have to. But how do you avoid? Basically, how do you avoid rebuilding in Dynasty? Because rebuilding is awful. Nobody wants to do it. There's some sickos out there who like rebuilding Dynasty teams and flipping them. I suppose that's fun for some people, but what's really fun is winning championships and being in the playoffs. So you never want to be throwing years away. So how do we avoid that? How do we be a contender now and in the future? What are some tips?
Yeah, I think not only did you start to touch on it right there, but we also both kind of talked about it in our opening statements as well. Right, a lot of it's about not overextending yourself. I wrote, the kind of key phrase at the top of my notes here is accepting variance. So we think about contenders, right? And instantly, what does every show talk about all the time? Trade for these players right now. And like, yeah, we do that stuff too because, it's Dynasty. You should be trading for people. That's how the game goes. But what's not as talked about as much, but is very important for contenders, is that sometimes the best move is the one you don't make.
Yep.
A few weeks ago, this was in a redraft league, mind you, but I thought I made a steal of a trade, upgrading from Chase Brown to Josh Jacobs. Since then, Josh Jacobs has earned me 0 extra wins that I would not have gotten with Chase Brown instead of him. He's outscored Jacobs in fantasy points per game. He's had more 20 fantasy point games since then. And Brown could be a top 5 back the rest of the season. You simply never know when the pendulum is going to swing in the other direction. So it's again, we're going to touch on this theme again for the third or fourth straight week, knowing yourself and your dynasty team. Because if you know yourself, if you know the context around your team and your roster, you should be able to confidently say whether or not you truly need to make a move. Because when you start panicking and you start denying variance, you start making short-sighted decisions, and that's when you start overextending yourself with capital and don't push yourself into making moves that you shouldn't do, because we know 2 weeks from now, your team that is, 6-4 or 6-5, that's maybe 1-3 out of the last 4 games. Like, think about your season, not just on your total record and your current playoff standing. Think about it in frames too. Like, are you on a winning streak? Like, how's your team looked in the past 4 weeks? Are you getting healthier? And so, like, all of these contextual clues, understanding your team will help you understand exactly what it is you need. And if you know what you need, you're never going to overextend yourself. You're never going to sit around panicking. Like in our, we were talking about this backstage, Dynasty Roundtable League. There's a lot of moves that I could go out and do that would be dumb. Like going and trading away one of my first round picks, because my team's pretty good, but I'd be lying if I said that I was an ironclad, like, expect me in the semifinals or championship type of team. So if I'm going to start going and throwing away first round picks, that would be dumb, because I can end up as a 7 seed, get bounced first round, finish at the as the second worst team in the league next year, and all of a sudden my roster is in shambles, all because of one trade where I overextended myself. So I'm starting to ramble now, but the long story short is, like, sometimes you just have to accept variance and sit tight.
Yeah, And I say this, some people might think this is stupid. I don't care. If you were cheering for your dynasty team, like say I'm a fan of the Bears, and I know who owns the Bears. It's the McCaskey family. I don't really like the McCaskies all that much because I don't think they're very good owners. They're nice people, but they're not very good owners of the team because they've proven time and again, and we're seeing it play out this year, that they don't know how to hire coaches. And if put yourself in the fan seat of your dynasty team, would you want you to be the owner of that team? Don't be a Woody Johnson dynasty owner, okay? Don't be a Woody Johnson dynasty owner. Don't go trading for Devontae Adams when you're at the bottom of the standings, okay? Don't do it. Just don't do it. And you have to be honest with your roster. You have to be honest with yourself and your team and the direction that it's going. Just make the next best move for yourself as a contender, as a contending team and a rebuilding team, because you never want to be in the situation where you're rebuilding and you have a roster full of veterans that nobody wants because you made a bunch of bad trades. So we're kind of getting into the rebuilding side of this, but I think it bears repeating, and I think it's important. For a contending team, my answer would be just think about it from that perspective. Think about it from, is this going to be a good move to help me win? Is it worth it? There are several tools that you can use, several trade calculators you can use if you're ever unsure of if a trade's worth it or not. My go-to move is I really, really don't want to get rid of a first-round rookie pick, as we talked about at the start of the show. I'm much more willing to trade my seconds, thirds, and fourths for veterans. That's typically the direction I go. I try to target a veteran that can put my team over the top. Alvin Kamara, I think, is the perfect example. We'll talk about Joe Mixon later. I think Joe Mixon is in the frustrating place of being worth a first, but nobody wants to trade a first for him because I'm trying to get rid of Joe Mixon in a league right now where I'm rebuilding, and I cannot get a first-round rookie pick for him. I've sent all the contenders offers, and nobody's biting, so that puts me in a dilemma where do I settle for a second plus some extra, or how far down the line do I go with trading away Joe Mixon? But these are some guys that I think can be had, especially if they're on the wrong team. And I think it's possible for Kamara, Joe Mixon, Darnell Mooney, Juwan Jennings to be on a rebuilding team. Like, these are Cedric Tillman. These are some guys that can really help you that aren't going to cost probably much more than a second-round pick, maybe a second-round rookie pick plus. So that's usually my move because I like to add top-tier quality talent. Now, if I'm a 1 seed or a 2 seed, and I feel pretty confident I'm going to maintain that 1 or 2 seed based on record, based on my roster, based on points scored, whatever the case may be, then we can have a conversation about, okay, what players am I going to target potentially to give up my first-round rookie pick? Because if I'm confident that pick is going to be the 111, the 112, now there's no way to know for sure because the 1 seed wins the league about 32% of the time, somewhere in there. Statistically, that's how it plays out. Now, if your team's so stacked, that might tip the scales in your favor. It might, but still, we're talking about 32% of the time. The 1 seed wins the league, which is as good as a chance as you can give yourself getting that bye week. But like, that's where I would be most comfortable trading away my 2025 first round pick. And again, I need a difference maker, and I typically like to throw the first in with a package of players to go get an elite option. Like if I can go get a Nico Collins, or I don't know if Tyreek Hill's worth a first-round pick anymore. I know at one time, on like a couple weeks ago, I said he probably is. I think he's a good buy low. Tyreek Hill's a difference maker now. I mean, Tyreek Hill, I feel like we're just waiting around for him to have an explosion week. I know he's been dealing with the wrist injury, but players like that, it doesn't have to be Tyreek Hill, but a player that's going to put your team over the top, that's the kind of player that I'm willing to move a 2025 first for.